Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. As you can see today, I'm not at my plot. I'm in the beautiful village of Liss with Glynn, who has kindly let us have a tour of his allotment, and he's going to share some tips of what he's been doing since he took on his plot 2 years ago?
January last year.
January last year. How he's getting on, what he's growing, and everything in between.
Hey, my name's Glynn. A lot of people probably know me from my Instagram and Twitter feeds. I've done a little bit on YouTube, but not a great deal. It's a great pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
On my plot. I started this plot January last year. I suffer from various ailments, sciatica, chronic back pain, had a stroke like 6 years ago, and a few other problems with my legs. So it was going to be a challenge, but I'm happy with the way it's turned out. And what I'll do is I'll go down the other end of the garden to the front of the plot, and I'll show you the site I had when I first turned up here 18 months ago. Grass, brambles, stinging nettles, ferns, it was an absolute mess. But there was something in it, you could see the potential. So decided to take it on. Spent the first 2 or 3 weeks panicking as to what I was going to do, trying to calm myself down and come up with a plan. And the plan eventually we decided on was to just bring a few beds at the top end of the plot into cultivation, cover the rest with black tarpaulin, and start from there. Suffering from chronic backache, sciatica, having had a stroke 6 years ago, I didn't want to work too hard, didn't want to push it too much. So it was a case of having to do it slowly and steadily. And also because I was coming up to retirement, funding was going to reduce. So everything had to be done on a budget, either cheap or as cheap as possible. So I knew I wanted raised beds, but we had to do it as cheap as possible. So while we were working on the top of the plot, we were starting to formulate plans for the rest of it. I wanted a polytunnel, so I started looking at where a polytunnel could go. I had the option of 2 locations, and as always the committee at the parish council have the final choice. They have the final say, and I think I'm happy as to the location they said I could have. So we start back in the late January of last year when I first came on the plot. What if we walk up through to the other end, we can look at where we started. You can see the old or my new compost bin there, right the way up that left hand side, almost up to the water bin, was brambles, an absolute mess of brambles. They had originally been trained on trellises between these 2 wooden posts, with wires running between them, but it had been left probably 5 years since they'd been last looked at. I do know, talking to locals, that when the original tenant left, an older chap came in, he pottered around a couple of beds for a year, he left, then a couple of older ladies came in, they pottered around for a couple of years. So really it hadn't been tended to properly for about 3 to 5 years. So we knew it was going to be a lot of work to do. But whilst I was clearing away all these brambles and chucking it all into a big pile in the middle, decided one day to rake up to make a nice neat pile at the bottom end for a bonfire. And as I was raking this area, all of a sudden I found patches of ground. The grass just came out of it, and there was beds literally started to appear in front of my eye, and we had 1 bed there, 1 bed here, and a second bed just down to my right. I thought, right, I've now got enough, that'll do if I get some crops into these. And I had, I'm trying to remember what I had now, I had a big brassica cage I built there for my cabbages and broccoli and other bits and pieces. In this area I had, ironically, runner beans, which I haven't got again. And in the bottom area I had potatoes and other root vegetables, carrots and bits and pieces. That was enough for last year as an experiment. I didn't know how the soil was going to work. So it was just suck it and see while we sat down to do some planning. It was at that stage that I came across a brilliant piece of allotment software, VegPlotter.com. Acquired that software, and that allowed me to come up with ideas of layout, how I wanted it laid out. Bear in mind that the original footpath, original access, was down that gate and came up this path at the side. So that was the original access way. and the original beds came from the fence behind me right out to the path, and I don't want long beds. Long beds are more likely to make me want to step into them to get to the other side rather than walk around them. Also, because of my health, the beds had to be no wider than I could reach into the centre to either plant crops or to weed. So by doing all of that, I came up with 2.4 by 1.2, which, if you buy standard decking timber, any timber comes in 2.4 lengths, 3 lengths makes each bed. So it was easier to do it that way. Although as it was in the end, I went for 1.2 lengths and joined them together. But that was further down the line, but at least this software gave me the chance to plan it. The whole idea of this layout was influenced by Jessie at plot 37, because when you look at her plot, it's laid out of 2 main rows with a side bits with all sorts. She's got her polytunnel on that side, and they're all made of 2.4 by 1.2s. So that the concept of this layout came from her idea. It is used by other people, but I didn't want to have an eclectic, I'll have a bed here and a bed there. I like to have a little bit of structure. Maybe it's 30 years in the RAF has that effect on you.
Everyone's got their own style though.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And I think you just find that when you start planning and you start planting and you're thinking about what you want to grow, that's when you start thinking, how do I want it to look?
Yeah, it is, and it was a case as well of identifying what veg and I'm going to grow, and therefore is it viable to grow that veg in this ground. We did some tests with the soil was looking good. This is a very sandy soil. Might be similar to you get up your part of the country.
We've got clay.
Oh, you're more into the Thames clay belt. Down here we're into the we got chalk to the south, chalk to the north, and we got this sandy sort of, they call it greenstone, which breaks down into a sandy loam, the soil. Which again, very similar to as Jess at plot 37 has. You put compost on it, and within a year it's gone. It's just sucked into the soil and vanished. Yeah. So it's hard soil to work with, so we had to work out what crops, and that was going to dictate the number of beds I had. And also as well, I wanted to have the polytunnel. So again, that decides things, at the end of the day, is what space you've got available. And not everybody can have what they want. I'm lucky that I've got what I've got. It's a good sized plot, and I'm more than happy with the way it's gone so far. But for me, the biggest challenge was when we got to the revamp in October last year, and that's when I started the real transition from what I'd seen to what we have now. Last year was a clean up, make do, sit down and think about it year. I didn't retire until the October. Come October, as each of those beds up here emptied, they were covered with tarpaulin, and then starting at the bottom, literally from the fence at the bottom up to this point up here behind me, we dug the whole lot over a series of weekends.
Wow.
Even when we had the -11 frost. Good little tip, they say keep the soil warm by covering it over. As I walked onto the plot, I checked the thermometer and it was -10, and I took a fork and I jammed it into the ground and it bounced. Pulled back the plastic, the fork went straight into the ground.
Wow.
It has stayed a good 12, 13 degrees warmer, so it does work.
It does work.
It really keeps your soil warm, even with those sort of frosts. So we cleared our way up here, and as I got to the halfway point, which will be 4 beds up each side, we brought a stop to the digging at that stage, and I bought the first load of timbers in. The next thing was, again, I said earlier, it's a budget job, and I looked around for the cheapest form of timber I could get my hands on, and it's fencing featherboards. They're I think 5 or 6, no, 5-inch featherboards, 125 mil, 1.2 metre lengths, because that was the cheapest way to get it shipped. Got shipped in from a place on the east coast of Essex. And then bed by bed, I just identified where it was by laying out the strings, built the raised bed, put it into position, didn't anchor it in at that stage. I could then get into the bed, turn it over, weed it, and we did that bed at a time, and then we laid the fabric down in between. The fabric will eventually be covered over with wood chip, but again, it's as I can afford it. I'm hoping to get some trees fall down in the woods around us this winter, grab the groundsman and say, I'll have the wood chip, thank you very much. It's a case of being in the right place at the right time. But once we got the first 8 in place, I then turned over this next patch, and again the same structure. By that time I'd already paid for the first lot of timbers. I could then pay for the second load of timbers, and we built it up. We built up each raised bed again, same format, turned over each one in turn, and ended up with the plot we have now. So that was how we got to this stage, and that took from beginning of October through until excuse me, end of February. So 5 months to completely revamp this middle section. I'd actually built the 3 raised beds behind over there on that side of the plot first, because I wanted to get the onions and the garlic and the shallots in before the first frost. I'm glad I did, because the garlic and the onions, the garlic and the shallots are looking brilliant, really good. The green tops are fantastic. I lifted the cover up to weed it again, and as I was weeding around it, I just touched one of the bulbs and it just collapsed. So when we checked every single, there was 50 onion bulbs in there, every one of them had rotted to the core. So that was ripped out and had to be replaced with spring planted onions. However, on that one we got the garlic in before the first frost of the year, and the shallots, and they're not far off ready to pick soon. We're just waiting for the foliage. It's starting to die back now. Once that died back and fallen over, we will get all of those out. I'll free up another beds, but these were the first 3 beds. One for the rhubarb. We used to have rhubarb on the other side, and it was in the wrong place. It's where I wanted my polytunnel to go. So again, you've got to be flexible, moving stuff.
You've got to be flexible.
Yeah, you've got to move the stuff around, so we've moved there. Didn't get a good crop this year. It bolted straight away, which is not unusual for the rhubarb had gone into stress, being lifted and moved. So I didn't expect to get much, and as soon as it bolted, I cut out the flower stem to preserve it, and it's fine. That'll die back now, and I'll get a good crop next year, all being well. So this is the ops room, the control room, nerve centre of the operation. I was lucky. Shed came with the allotment. Couldn't believe it, even had the key in the lock. So a lockable shed, thank you very much, I love that. At that stage we had 3 water butts here. There was one at the back, there was another one at the front which was made from an old wheelie bin. So one side of the roof fed the one at the back, the other one fed the wheelie bin, and this IBC container. Which was empty at the time, and I found out afterwards why, because it leaked from the tap. That one, there was no means of getting it filled up, so I would imagine at one time somebody would have got a hose pipe from the river or whatever and filled it up, or it would have been a laborious job doing it by hand, but it was there. So what I did, got rid of the wheelie bin, because that restricted the door access into the shed, extended the drainage. The drainage comes down from the standard guttering behind the shed door, comes down, held together with wire and gaffer tape. A really professional job. It's the only way allotment should be. And then that's at its max. It's filled up to about 800 during the rains of the latter part of the winter. So shed, important part of the shed. It's got the kettle in there. Most important.
Most important thing.
Day doesn't start until I've had my first coffee. This bath had been it was dug into the ground over there against the fence as a pond full of stagnant, stinking water, covered in grass. I only discovered it when I fell in it. Up to my knees in.
Oh no!
I was absolutely stinking. The wife refused to let me in the house, so I took the trousers off inside. So that was the bath. It was lifted up, and I opened up. They'd sealed the plug hole. I opened up that, made a few other holes in the base. Perfect raised beds for growing carrots.
Carrots, yeah.
Keeps them up, elevated out of the way. The polytunnel has become my pride and joy this year. I'd seen so many horror stories and horror films, and I think yours was one of them.
Ours was definitely one of them.
But that was after I'd already done what I'd done here. I'd seen these horror stories, especially last year when we considered we'd had 3 serious storms in a row.
We did.
And I'd seen polytunnels been loaned to other allotmenteers, not intentionally, and it flew down the allotment. So when I went to get this polytunnel, it is a cheap polytunnel, no denying that. Again, on a budget, and these are the ones more prone to get blown away. So I looked at YouTube at how Americans make theirs hurricane proof, and the common factor coming out of it was securing the frame and the fabric to the same point, so that the whole thing becomes a single unit. So what I've done, just step inside, you can see it. Looking down at the floor, you can see there's a 3x2 timber. That goes all the way around as a single frame, screwed together. Then in each corner and each upright, there's a 4-foot post driven 3 feet into the ground and screwed into that timber frame. That was the first part to go in. The frame of the polytunnel went on next, and that is held in place by a hose clamp, the pipe clamps you use for securing conduit or water pipe, and they're spaced every 2 feet all the way around. So that secures the frame to the metal frame to the timber frame. The problem is then that might be fantastic, but I've got to then secure this to that frame as well. So if you look back around the outside, there's a timber plate all the way around, and that is screwed through the timber into the timber frame underneath, so that the whole of that fabric all the way around on 3 sides, or 3.5 sides, is connected directly to the frame along with the actual. So if I can keep any wind out of here, this thing hopefully will stay and touch wood, survive so far. But anyway, the inside. Plan with the inside, I didn't really know. I wanted raised beds eventually, but I was going to do pots for this year because I didn't have the funding to buy the raised beds. And then the gentleman who had the allotment at the bottom, the last one at the end, put out the announcement, I'm quitting, help yourself. So boom, that bed suddenly arrived, made up of 2 really small beds, and the bed behind me was made up from a bit of timber I had at home plus some of his timber. So we had the 2 raised beds filled with compost, bit of topsoil. It all sits on top of this fabric which goes under the whole thing, so it should be protected from weeds coming up from underneath, and the walls are lined with plastic sheeting to stop the sides from rotting too much.
And how many tomatoes have you got growing in here, Glynn?
I've got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 tomatoes.
16 tomatoes.
I'm trying to think of the names of them now. I've got Elsa Craig, I've got Tigerella, I've got Money Maker, I've got Gardener's Delight, Coeur de Bleu, and I've got coming on for outside, I've got Amateur and Roma, plus one other which is called
San Marzano.
Thank you. So that is also in there as well at the front of them all is the chilies. We've got chilies for the first 6
really well.
and the peppers at the end. All I've got to put in there now is marigolds and basil.
Marigolds and basil.
The classic.
The classic combinations.
Yeah. So that is the polytunnel. So let's have a look down now. We go back down the beds. We've already discussed the onions, garlic, and bits on that side. So first 2 beds up this end. On my right is where the aforementioned Amateur and Roma tomatoes are going to go. That's my outdoor bush tomatoes. They're going to go into that bed there. And the bed on the left, I only finished it last night. That will take squash, pumpkins. It's actually what I'm going to put in there is butternut squash. We don't like the big pumpkins ourselves. We don't eat the big pumpkin, but we do eat lots of butternut squash. So we're putting that's what's going to go in there, and there should be enough room in there for 3 plants. And they've got all this room over here then to spread themselves.
Yeah.
Because they do like.
They do like room.
Yeah, I had them on the bed over that side temporarily last year, and they came across about as far as this point.
Wow.
Yeah, they took over. So they're going in there. Coming down on the right hand side, this is going to be covered with the Enviro mesh, the white mesh, fairly soon because it contains an allium. This is my leeks. They were planted out last week. You just see the very tender plants in the holes at the moment. And they're plants out the standard way of just dip the hole a lot bigger than you need, drop the leek into it and don't touch it, just pour water in, and that just draws the soil in and around the roots. So there's the leeks. On the left hand side, this bed here is runner beans, 2 complete rows of it, 2 plants per stake, so that's 32 plants in all. It will become clear in a minute that we like beans of all sorts. So that one's going there. In the front part here is to be planted out the courgette plants. I've got them 4 of those at home ready to come in. And on this side again, not runner beans this time, French climbing beans. 4 different varieties in all, 1 variety on each side, and again the same over there as French climbing beans. And what we'll do with those, they will produce long pods like the broad beans, and we'll leave them on the vine to dry. To dry, yeah. Then we'll harvest them as dry beans for storage. The runner beans we eat fresh because those will go stringy if we don't. Yeah. Whereas the climbing beans, that's my winter casserole crop. So all in all, I think I worked out with multiples in these and there, it's something about 200 odd plants altogether have gone in. Wow. We like beans. We like beans as well. Looking a bit sorry for itself at the moment is the nasturtium they went in this week. They're just getting themselves established, but that is the sacrificial flowers. They're not there for flower, although that would be nice. They're there for the flowers to be attacked and eaten by aphids. Yeah. So there'll be more going in. Wherever I've got space now, nasturtiums will be going in. Yeah. So the whole thing will turn orange eventually, and then hopefully it'll turn black as they get attacked and keep my other crops off. We moved out into beds over there, and these next 3 beds are my brassicas this year. All I've got is a mixture of different types. Caraflex in here. Those I think are called Gardener's Delight. There should be 6 plants in there. 3 of them have disappeared completely. So they're going to have to be replanted, but I'm not going to replant them with the same species. I've got some Savoy cabbage, which I've been looking for a home for. I'll put 3 Savoys into that part there. These, again, very good to just taking off the leaves, chopping it up, freezing it, or drying them out, putting them into storage, and that will keep us in greens throughout the year. On this side here, I've got first planting out of purple sprouting broccoli, and I use it as my storage area for other plants waiting to go into the ground. Keeps them under the net, keeps the butterflies.
Keeps them nice and protected.
It does, yes. Again, further variety. This one in here is Brussels sprouts. First planting, I'm doing 2 plantings in Brussels sprouts. 4 in each planting, although there are 6 plants in there, 2 of them don't look very good, so I'll lift those and put in 4 fresh ones. So that'll give me a bit of time spread on the harvesting of my Brussels sprouts. That's a slow process one. And on this side again, we've got calabos, which is a red cabbage. It gives you, it forms like a long thin cone, and when you slice it in half, it's a like whitey, greeny, red colours. So that's that there. And here we've got Caraflex, which is a particular, that forms that tight ball type spring cabbage, which is very nice for early in the year. So that's those there. So that's all of my broccoli. That's all sorry, and my brassicas.
Just while we're this side, just Vince, if you could just go around and just show the setting that we're in, because it is absolutely gorgeous. So peaceful. You probably did just hear a train, because Glynn said every 15 minutes. Yep. Every 15 minutes there is a train that goes past. The train tracks are just at the other end of the plot. It's such a gorgeous setting. It's so peaceful. And how many plots did you say were on this
There are a
site?
total of 11 plots.
So there's 11 plots on this site, and they run just in a line.
In a single line with a single footpath running down one edge.
Yeah.
It's literally a strip of land between the railway track and the public footpath. Belonged to the parish council and converted into allotment, one of 6 plots they've got in the parish. On this side we've got broad beans. This is the third sowing broad beans. We'll come to the first and second ones in a minute, and the thirds are almost as good as the first and seconds. So that's the third sowings of broad beans. That's a variety called Dreadnought. In front of those I've got celery, and I've just planted out 2 rows of swede. So that's my winter root crop within there. Moving back down, this is my pea area. Sorry, the area I grow peas. Again, peas are
They're looking great.
Yeah, peas are something my wife loves, and I have promised I will not eat them all before they get home. Or before they even leave the plot. And again, those are succession sowing. First succession over there, second sowing there, and third sowing was done last week underneath the... this is just to keep the squirrels off from picking the seeds.
Yeah.
Coming back down then, on my left I've got, I've now planted in the final succession sowing of cauliflower. So I've got sowing 1, sowing 2 and sowing 3. So these here should start cropping in about a month, 6 weeks time. On the right side, this I thought I was going to have to completely re-sow, because I looked at it last week, been in the ground for almost 2 months, no sign of anything. Parsnips, turnips and carrots, and when I got on my hands and knees to weed it, I found out that they were there, and so they're coming on. 2 rows of parsnip, 2 rows of turnip, and under the EnviroMesh cage is 4 rows in 2 successions. The second succession you can't see coming through yet.
And is this something that you just lift up and down? You can just move that where you need it?
Yeah, I've got one over
I
in the
think we
corner.
need one of those.
This is gardening tip number whatever. Old single bedstead.
Oh, okay.
You know, the old standard divan bed? That was actually, it was part of our old double bed, which is made up of 2 singles bolted together. Sawed it in half. There's your bed.
Wow.
And that's the other half just popped up
And
against
that's
them.
the other one. Wow, yeah.
So if you've got something which needs either just seed protection, or because of the carrot root fly needs that protection in the carrots, then yeah, they're just made up of EnviroMesh stapled onto bedstead. Going back down to the 2 bottom beds, peas again. This was an experiment I did in sowing seeds in October, November. I've never done it before. I'd seen a lot of people on YouTube talking about it. And when I came to plant these up March this year, they were a very, very pitiful looking crop. So I went ahead, I've stuck with it, and now they really are waking up now that we've got the warmer days.
They look great.
So they're looking good. But at least with the peas, you can see like the winter grown, and then over there the 3 successions of the spring grown. In this bed, this was, I'm not sure what went wrong. I bought some, I'd seen this thing, somebody talking about it on YouTube, called the Rab 60 Japanese broccoli. It's not a broccoli, but it was a 60 grade to maturity.
Okay.
Right? And they did. I planted 12 plants out, and 8 plants, or all 12 plants came to maturity. The Rab 60 matured after 60 days. But it wasn't all. There was, for some unknown reason, considering they're all in the same tray, randomly placed seeds, 4 rows of cabbages as well. I haven't got a clue what cabbage they are. So I had 2 rows of this Rab 60 and this unknown row of cabbages. We shall just leave them and find out.
We will find out. Mystery cabbage.
The mystery cabbage. My opinion, the Rab was grown as an experiment, never tried it before. There is a Rab 45 as well. That's RAAB.
AAB.
Yeah,
right,
Rabe or Rab. 45 and 60, French A seeds do them. They say you can eat the flower, the little floret head like a sprouting broccoli. You can eat the leaves and you can eat the stems. The florets and the leaves are fine. The stems are fibrous and absolutely disgusting.
Right.
I will never grow them again. But unknown cabbage plant. Right. And then finally, on this side here, the ones at the back, the 2 rows at the back, they were my autumn grown experiment. The idea is they are going to be the first flush of crops.
Yeah.
These were then sown in the spring. I don't think autumn sowing is going to give me my first flush of crops somehow.
No, I did the same, and the whole bed I did of autumn sowing broad beans. I think I only had 3 plants maybe. I think I had 3 plants left, and they're not doing as well as the spring sown.
Yeah, so again, another one from my book for next year is don't sow
Good anything. Experiment though.
It is. That's
Good experiment. It's all about
that's what it's all about. Yeah. Compost area. What would we do without pallets?
What would we do?
I was very fortunate. The last job I had, although I was office bound, we were part of a warehouse group, so we had access to pallets. So yeah, pallets. Potatoes. I haven't grown potatoes in the ground for a long time, for many years. I thought last year I'd try it. They were okay. I thought I'd try it again this year. Originally I had them over on the other side of the plot. I've got first earlies, 2 rows, 3 rows of second early and 3 rows of main, just to see how they work. I'm not a big fan. I prefer growing them in containers, and I've got some containers over in the undergrowth on the right hand side which you can't see for stinging nettles. Right. But they are there, coming through the nettles. So with the potatoes, and takes us back up then towards the rhubarb, that completes the tour of the plot. One of the greatest aids I had when I first started to lay out the ideas for this particular plot was a piece of software, fantastic piece of software called VegPlotter.com, produced in the UK, and what it allows me to do was survey this site as it was when I took it over and put it onto my computer, including the original beds, and then on top of that I could superimpose different layers of the beds I wanted, and if I wanted to change everything I could delete it, start again. At one stage I had 8 different layout plans on the software, each with a different program running. I was just playing around with them, so it's a great tool rather than having masses of paper, grid paper, and crossing out and rubbing out, or even trying to do it on site. You could do it at home when you've got peace and quiet and a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. The other advantage of this is that one shows the top half of this allotment. If I turn it that way around, you'll see that's where my tomatoes will go, and that should have runner beans. It shows a runner bean cage, and there's a runner bean frame there. But you can also go inside the polytunnel and do an expanded layout of what the polytunnel is going to look like. Which tomato plant's going to go where, which chili plant's going to go where. And it will also tell you if you're trying to put the plants too close together. It will come up with bright red as a warning that you're trying to cram too much in there. You can override that if you like pushing too much into your beds. Also built into the program is crop rotation warnings as well. So certain crops which don't like or shouldn't be planted in the same bed every year, when you try to do it on the software, when I'm planning next year's beds this coming autumn, it'll warn me, can't grow that there because you had that in that same bed last year. But the other great advantage of this software is obviously you can print it all out and take this up to the site, and this becomes then my worksheet on the site. Gives me my what to sow indoors, what to sow outdoors, what to plant out, the various plants which need planting out. Also, because I've identified on this software what bed's which, it tells me here what bed it's going to go into. So I can sit in my shed and I know that I've got to put 16 French Cassafileti bean plants into bed 11, which is that bed there with the beans in it. That's one of the rows in there. So it makes it easier when I get up to the plot where I haven't got Wi-Fi, I can't access that software, although you can access it on your telephone, on a tablet if you've got a SIM card.
So when you first took on your allotment plot, what was the biggest hurdle that you had and how did you overcome it?
It's interesting because a lot of people would imagine it's a physical barrier, i.e. you're overwhelmed by the amount of crop.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that. I'd come up here on the first working day after I got access, after I got the key, and I started doing some work over the next 2 days. And I came back the following weekend and I stood on the plot roughly where I am now with brambles, weeds, everything everywhere. And I literally almost, well, I firstly broke down because I just was so overwhelmed with the amount of work. And it's that being overwhelmed, thinking, how the hell am I ever going to do this? That's when I just took a rake in hand and cleared all the rubbish up and discovered the first beds. But it's that overcoming that. And I'd imagine there are an awful lot of allotmenteers. And my advice to them is, you get that stage, whether it's a day 1, day 10, even after a year, you think, oh, is it worth it? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep going through the hardships. Have a plan, but be prepared to change that plan. That's the other important factor. Is it's all very well sticking to plan. I come up with a structured plan. This may not be here in 2 years' time. I might redesign it completely. I don't know. But flexibility is important. But it's that my biggest challenge at the outset was overcoming that mental anguish and anxiety about, have I really cut off more than I could chew?
Yeah. Okay, so many thanks to you, Glynn, for letting us look around your allotment and hearing your story about from when you've taken it on to up until this point. We'd love to come back in a couple of months and see how you've actually got on. We're going to put a link to all of Glynn's social media and his website in the description. You can read his story on there. Thank you so much for watching today, and we'll see you again soon.